Put that cigarette out.
Hi everybody, welcome to another Toy Guys Talking, and today I'm joined by, I pronounce it Sean Fewster. Did I pronounce that in a proper Australian? Fewster.
Close enough, Sean Fewster, close enough. But it's kind of like Michael Mercy, eh?
Yeah, you speak Canadian. We were just doing a little chat before this and teaching each other our native languages. So with Canadian, you got to add the A. Sometimes you throw in a French word to fancy it up. Merci beaucoup. Très bien.
Stick a le in front of everything and it becomes French.
Le or la, depending on the, the gender. And then for the Aussies, I already know how to speak Aussie. Ripper, beauty, beautiful, crikey.
You talk out your nose, you talk as fast as you can, mate. You just keep going.
That's right. Yeah, I did a project years ago with a stage actor who did a fantastic Aussie accent. And he said, the secret's all in the nasally. And I'm like, but that doesn't make any sense. Aussies, by and large, are really cool. They're really badass. You know, like Mad Max. He's like, yeah, but think about it. Through the nasally. It's nasally, you know. It's the duck's guts. I'm like, one of those things you never notice until someone actually breaks it down and points it out.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's us. We have our strine, and actually it's funny, it's election day here today. So it's very Aussie at the moment. Everywhere you go, you can smell sausages barbecuing because the big thing at election stalls is to have sausages in bread, selling them as a fundraising thing.
Really?
Yeah, and so there's a election polling booth just down the road from us, and so if you open the window at our place right now, it's just sausages and onions wafting in, which isn't really a bad way to mark democracy.
Interesting. Yeah, too much is made out of voting for the freedom and betterment of society, and we need to really focus on the nourishment, the sustenance aspect of democracy. So
exactly,
I like that idea.
Democracy, sausages for all.
I like that idea. Have you always lived in Australia?
I have.
That's a great slogan, by the way. That needs to be a T-shirt.
Well, actually, on Twitter, if you do the hashtag #AusPol, as in Australian politics, it actually comes up with a sausage in bread as a little icon.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so I've always lived here. I was born 1979 and have grown up in South Australia in particular. So that's the central southern part of the country, if you think of the Australian map, we're down the bottom and in the middle. And, our state is temperate, but it goes from a temperate coast through to a desert the further north you go and get inland. And we're the gateway to the outback that everybody talks about. So you've got an interesting little mix of industry and urban and farming, moving on to your deserts, your kangaroos. A lot of your Mad Max was filmed up here, up north here. I was going to
ask you, we'll get to toys in a minute, but I have to ask you, where are you in relation to Broken Hill?
We are south of Broken Hill, a couple of hours, but Broken Hill is within driving distance. Then again, everything's within driving distance in Australia because it's the number one way to get around.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're not far from Broken Hill in the sense of if you're prepared to get in a car and drive for a couple of hours, and it's a pretty amazing place.
Do you ever just get in the car and drive? Because
drive.
I mean, it seems like such a simple concept, and I can't believe that this has enamored me for decades, but I love the idea of Mad Max, just going in the car and driving.
Yeah,
you would think, like, because so many great movies have great plots, and this guy just went mad. He's mad, man. And he gets in his car, which is the duck's guts, and he just drives, and he looks for the gasoline. I'm like, why does this do it for me? But it does. And when Fury Road came out, I was like, that's all I want. Just driving and looking for the gasoline. Like, it's enough.
George Miller knew exactly what he was doing with that sequel. Yeah, and you can. Driving holidays are massive here. So when I was a child, there goes a Canadian now.
I was just going to say, hey, how's it going, eh?
Good to see you. You're getting a wave. Hey, how's it going, eh?
Oh, I don't live there, so I'm not coming over.
She's a cosplayer. She's not going to duck into the screen. Just.
Hi.
Hey, take off your hoser, eh?
How are you doing?
I'm doing good, eh? How are you, you hoser?
I'm good, eh?
Awesome. It's nice to speak to another Canadian, eh?
I know, right? It's good.
Oh, right on, eh?
All right. Have fun, y'all.
Thanks.
I love how thick your accent suddenly becomes.
Au revoir. It only happens when one Canadian talks to another Canadian. I mean,
it's like gravy. It just congeals.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it, yeah.
The gravy on top of poutine, it just, congeals.
Oh, I was just corrected recently. It's called, and this is really, I think, obnoxious or pretentious, poutine.
Poutine.
Yeah, poutine.
Poutine.
It's almost like the president of Russia. Poutine. It's like put in, poutine.
Yeah.
I'm like, you mean poutine? No, it's poutine. So that's apparently the proper pronunciation of. It's still delicious, no matter how pretentious the name of it sounds.
One of our closest friends, he likes to essay the mayor out of The Simpsons, and he will look at Justine and he'll say, "Poutine, say it, Frenchie, poutine, like chowder."
That's awesome. So one of the things,
driving holidays, they were huge. I remember, like, literally, you would get in the car and, we're going to go to Queensland to see your relatives, which is the beautiful Las Vegas-y style beach area. And I know Las Vegas isn't on a beach, but imagine Las Vegas on a beach and you've got Queensland.
Yeah.
And so, we're going to drive for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
You just pack up the four-wheel drive and put a camper trailer on the back, and you stop at caravan parks or trailer parks along the way, and you work your way up the coast, and you stay, and then you work your way a bit further up the coast, and then you drive all the way back. You usually drive back inland so you can see the kangaroos and the horses and, the steak ranches and things like that,
Oh, it's a beautiful landscape as long as you're moving, because I have a few friends in Australia, and it seems to be true, that kind of stereotype of everything's trying to kill you. Right? Like, I'd get pictures of these spiders and lizards and stuff, and like, wow, that stuff is wild. But we were talking about Mad Max. Do you have, or did you have any Mad Max toys or memorabilia? There's not a lot out there, but let's start with that.
And you know what's funny? It really does sum up the whole Australian collecting experience, because you couldn't get anything in my area. Now, I'm going to preface this entire conversation with, I'm not an expert on what was available in different parts of Australia and what was not, and we'll get into why that is in a minute. But in my local area, you were lucky if you could find the Mad Max video cassette to rent.
Really?
There was no merchandise. There was no nothing. I remember an older friend had a poster that he'd probably stolen from a cinema as a way of actually having something up in his room. Jeez. Lots of drawings, lots of pictures, but stuff just wasn't around, because even though Mad Max was such an Australian thing, it wasn't the pop cultural phenomenon at the time that it was everywhere else.
I don't think anything was, other than Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. And I think with Return of the Jedi, that's where it really went, like, kaboom. I think Star Wars is responsible for a lot of toys, pop culture collectibles, just exploding like that. Like with Mad Max, I don't think there was they didn't even do models for years and years, right?
I think so, no. And I mean, here it was very much a case of, if you wanted to play Mad Max, you grabbed a stick to be your gun and you climbed into one of the inevitable burnt out or partly built cars that a family member had somewhere on a property. Yeah. And you used that. That was the way you played that game, that character.
Did you ever see the actual Mad Max toys that came out, I think in the 90s? I think it was by N2 Toys.
I've got a vague recollection of them, but I don't remember them really strongly.
So they were basically the articulation of a vintage Kenner Star Wars figure. A little bigger, though. I want to say they were about the size of like a He-Man figure or Cops, maybe a little shorter than a Cops and Crooks. So just a little taller than a Joe or a Kenner figure. But they look terrible. And being a huge fan of Mad Max, I remember seeing the cards on the wall from a distance and going, Mad Max! And then seeing them up close, and like their heads looked like, do you remember the Inhumanoids?
Yeah.
The Earth Core figures with the teeny tiny heads. That's what the Mad Max figures look like. Like the heads are, and it's fine on an Inhumanoid Earth Core guy, because it's actually a giant suit. It's a little guy in a big suit, so it works, I guess. But the Mad Max figures, really tiny heads, I always thought, on these okay bodies, not much articulation, but the detailing was good enough. They had like, the thing I really love about Mad Max, the whole world, is it's dusty and worn. It's like that first Star Wars movie. It's a used universe. So that was what was nice about that toy line, but it just didn't have legs. And what's really heartbreaking is that they had planned an interceptor for the line, which would have been a giant interceptor, not a 1/18th scale. Like these figures were, I guess, more like Nika sized
Yep.
figures. So it would have been a Nika sized interceptor, and they didn't sell enough, so they didn't make it. And to this day, I think that's just one of the biggest missed opportunities. Like, why don't we have more Mad Max interceptors? Choice of interceptors. There's just been an auto art model, which was really expensive, even more expensive now. And then some of the smaller guys, but like a toy that kids can jump and, rev and push a button and the blower. It doesn't have to be anything complicated like sparks or anything, but give me a button that you push and the blower, like the belt starts going on the blower.
Even just something like on the some of the G.I. Joe hovercrafts and things, just something you can push up and down so it spins around even. You pump it.
And then if you want to get really, because some of these movie style figures like Nika, McFarlane before them, they like to get really detailed, like the really small obscure stuff, like the tiny little accessory that no one remembers. Jack Burton, the sideshow Jack Burton, comes with that eyeball monster that's in the movie for like a minute, right? So it would have been cool to get an interceptor with like some of the stuff that Max uses at the end of the first movie, like to rig up that guy. He handcuffs his ankle and then the broken headlight and just like, what is this stuff? But fans of the movie know, oh yeah, cool, little hacksaw stuff.
It also sounds like a Saturday night in my town.
Yeah.
Hacksaws and handcuffs.
So you also do wrestling commentary. You're a wrestling commentator, right? Did you ever play with the LJN stuff when you were growing up?
Oh, I love the LJN stuff.
Yeah,
love the LJN stuff. Yep, I can see it up there. My stuff is in nowhere near as nice a nick as yours. Like I said on the round table the other day, I don't mind buying stuff that's a bit beaten up, has a bit of character,
especially
has a bit of legacy and history behind it.
That stuff is meant to be bashed too.
Exactly. I like looking at something and saying, yeah, you've been through the wars. I have my standards. If you can't see the face anymore, I'm like, no, I might pass on that one.
Yeah.
But what's been great about that is watching the local wrestling scene and sort of comparing it to the figures and the era that I grew up on wrestling. So, that's our Hulk Hogan, that's our Randy Savage in the local scene. Guess that makes me Mean Gene Okerlund. Yeah, I can live with that. I can handle that.
Mean Gene, or who were some of your favorite commentators growing up? Like Gorilla
Monsoon. It begins and ends with Monsoon. Yeah. I knew look at me, I'm a stick figure. I knew growing up that I could never perform in the ring. But I used to look at Mean Gene and I used to look at Monsoon and say, that's something maybe I could do.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate that my journalism collided with wrestling at one point, and that led to the local guys at Riot City Wrestling inviting me to come along and try out commentary. And as is typical with wrestling, I did it once and never heard from them. And then 2 days before the next show, they said, are you coming?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know I had the job. Oh, we didn't tell you didn't, so of course you have the job.
Well, plans change, pal.
Not booked, Terry.
Yeah.
So
sorry, I'm not booked. Were you bouncing on a trampoline, just staying in shape, just in case? Isn't that documentary amazing? We're talking about a documentary called Beyond the Ring with the beloved Dennis Stamp, dearly departed Dennis Stamp, who was this guy who would not show up unless he was booked, and but he kept himself in shape by bouncing on a trampoline. I don't do tricks.
This is my workout.
Yeah.
So I've been commentating for Riot City now for, I think, coming up on 5 years, and that's been fantastic. And then a local promoter opened up World Series Wrestling, which brings together the best of Australia's talent from around the country with some of the guys from Impact Wrestling, some of the guys from All Elite Wrestling, some of the guys from New Japan Pro Wrestling. And so we have tours 3 times a year where we do the major cities in Australia. And I fly with the boys to each of the cities and do the ring announcing, commentary, backstage stuff, skits. I was involved in a World Championship musical chairs match. Last year,
Do you have to hit someone with the chair, or
no, they did that. I just watched.
Oh, okay.
But the year before, we actually had Cody out, and he was the.
Oh, it's just Cody. Trademark. Sorry, no,
Cody.
No copyright infringement intended, Mr. McMahon and Mr. Levesque. Cody.
Oh, dear.
Cody and Brandy Rhodes. Don't you love how they get around that by calling him
absolutely.
Cody and Brandy? Because Brandy Rhodes can call herself Brandy Rhodes, his wife, but Cody can't call himself Cody such and such.
WWE, an interesting group.
Yeah.
So Cody, the American Nightmare, was out. He was the IWGP United States champion at the time.
Yeah.
But he was also injured. So he came on the tour. Shows what a guy he is. He came on the tour.
Was that
just
the
to
knee
meet
injury?
fans. The knee injury,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So he flew from America to Australia, which is not a short trip, with a knee injury to make sure that he met his commitments.
Yeah. Good
First
man.
class guy. The other guy who did the same thing was Joey Ryan. Joey Ryan had done his pectoral. So he came out injured as well. So Joey came out and challenged Cody to a staring contest for the IWGP Championship,
That's awesome.
which was amazing. And, you know, Cody's in the ring going, oh, Getter's going to kill me. I can't believe I'm about to do this, but all right, let's do it. So they said, Sean, handed me the mic, you know, call the match. So me thinking on my feet goes, the following match is scheduled for one blink. And the whole crowd goes, one blink.
Oh, that's awesome.
Cody turned around and looked at me and said, really?
He should have winked at you. Because that's like going over the top rope, but both feet have to hit the floor. So you're allowed to wink, but that's not a blink.
Well, sadly, the match ended with outside interference because just as Joey was gaining the upper hand in the staring contest, he'd taken the lollipop out of his pocket and put it in Cody's mouth, and it was all building. Brandy came out and slightly unzipped her top, and that was the end of Joey. He broke.
He did one of those. That's awesome. When you
it's really good fun.
When you commentate, do you have like a persona? Like what I mean is, James Janos, when he commentated, he wasn't James Janos. He was Jesse the Body Ventura. And yes, in the world of professional wrestling, it is your real personality cranked to the, volume of 10. But that's not James Janos. Like, he doesn't talk like that in everyday life. That's Jesse the Body Ventura. Do you... what I'm thinking is, like, Mauro Ranallo, I don't think is too far off from the real Mauro Ranallo when he's commentating. Is that your style more, or do you have like a persona when you're commentating?
That's my style more, to do sort of more like Mauro. The part of the reason I was asked to do Riot City is because I'm a journalist here in Adelaide, and I've written books, I've had a TV show, I've got a regular weekly radio show, things like that. So there's a persona of me in the town anyway. And they said, look, we'd like to marry our product up to that persona, so we'd like you to come in and be yourself as a wrestling fan,
so you lend
as a journalist, as a commentator.
You lend some respectability to it. Exactly like Mauro Ranallo, by signing on with WWE, has kind of lended his respectability, which I think maybe his respectability is being associated with WWE. Although he's in NXT, not WWE.
Yeah. I'd like to think I do. I'll leave that up to the bookers to decide whether I do or don't.
Yeah.
But that was certainly the goal. And so it's a more effusive version of my personality, and I play very much the white meat babyface commentator. I am the good guy commentator who calls it down the line and calls out the cheating and things like that. And my commentary partner, The Difference, Tyler Daniels,
love that nickname, The Difference.
He's great. The Difference. He's a 17-year veteran of the Australian scene, and he is very much the Jesse Ventura to my Gorilla Monsoon, and we have that kind of relationship and that dynamic and that back and forth.
Yeah.
Prior to that, I commentated with a fantastic mentor of a commentator who referred to himself as the Wolf Dog, and he's another veteran of the scene, and I learned so much from him because he was more the comedy heel. He was able to be a bit of a buffoon, but also support the heels. Mm-hmm. The Difference is very much the hard-bitten, nasty, side of Jesse Ventura. Yeah, and then there's a young man who's coming up in the ranks called Jimmy C, and he's just hilarious. 22, 23 years old. This kid's amazing. He's got a massive future. He's a genius for the way he thinks about stories, and he's our Bobby Heenan.
Oh, wow,
he's quite prepared to take the pratfalls, to do whatever it takes to get anybody over, and he's amazing to work with. So I'm blessed for partners to bounce off of.
I love Bobby Heenan's advice, or his style, when asked, how do you do what you do? And Bobby would say, wrestle like a manager, manage like a wrestler.
Yep.
And once you hear that, it all makes sense, because when Bobby would come down to the ring, he just had this persona. Even though he was the Weasel, he was a tough guy. He'd swagger right alongside Kurt Hennig. He'd stand in the corner. He'd yell at the ref, "Come on, ref!" But when he was actually in this ridiculous singlet in a match, he was the biggest coward. He was like terrified, looking around, flying over the top rope, and just what a like a brilliant split personality. As long as
Yeah.
he's in the sparkly suit, don't mess with me. I'm the brain. But yeah, in the wrestling gear, is there any like it wouldn't be anything large scale, but with your promotion, any like figures, merchandise, that type of thing?
Yes, we've got merchandise in terms of, T-shirts, hats, posters, knickknacks, things like that. There are some of the guys that have actually commissioned action figures
That's
of
what I was gonna
themselves
ask
to be
you
made.
next. 'Cause
And that does happen.
It's such an option these days, and it's such like an honor for toy collectors to be a toy. Like you hear from some toy enthusiasts who go, "I can't believe I'm an action figure now. I can't believe this is a lifelong dream." So I'm not at all surprised that being in that position, in the larger than life world of wrestling, to have that opportunity, like, yeah, some guys are gonna pay. Do you have any plans on doing a figure of yourself as the commentator, Sean?
Not as commentator, Sean. My wife actually commissioned for me my creator wrestler character from the video games many years ago, and so I got that made up, which was cool. A guy online, Scribble Customs 24, I think he's called, knocked together a figure of how I do myself up on the screen, and all the boys at Riot City have looked at it and go, "Yeah, you're never actually going to look like that." I'm like, "No, I'm never going to look like that." Funny story about that. I had the benefit of interviewing Hulk Hogan some years ago, which
congratulations or my condolences, depending on your opinion of Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, well, I've always looked at it as the difference between Hulk Hogan and Terry Bollea.
Yeah.
There's the character, there's the person, but I had the opportunity, so I took it. And as a child, I was a massive fan of the character. And toward the end of the interview, I mentioned that I was a big fan and things like that. And I said, I collected so much of your stuff growing up. I even had the LJN Hulk Hogan workout kit with the little dumbbells, the hand grip, and the tape. And he looked at my arms and said very kindly, "Let me ask you a favor, brother. Don't ever tell anybody that story." So I make sure I tell it all the time.
Yeah. Hulk Hogan was, mine and a lot of kids' hero growing up, obviously. I mean, I loved Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling. I cried when Don Morocco and King Kong Bundy, those dastardly villains, crushed his ribs because, I thought he was going to be gone forever. I was on the edge of my seat when he wrestled Andre the Giant. He was a real-life superhero. And, as we all get older, we start to learn the difference between the character and the performer. And wrestling is the wildest of all of them because they blur the line more than I think any other entertainment world does. Like a guy like Mel Gibson can come out and he can play a completely fabricated character with a different name, different background, different everything, different philosophy, and he can convince you so well that you think he's that guy. And sometimes actors play basically themselves, right? Clint Eastwood sort of basically plays himself. Mel, a lot of the time, plays himself. But in wrestling, like sometimes they even use their real name. So when John Cena comes out and he comes home and he's John Cena, it gets things very confusing. I was just listening to it was the Jim Ross podcast, Grilling JR, a great new podcast hosted by Conrad Thompson. And they were talking about when the British Bulldog was feuding with Shawn Michaels and they wanted to bring Davey Boy Smith's wife into the angle, Diana Hart Smith. And there was going to be this whole thing about Shawn was hitting on her, but then it would turn out that she was hitting on Shawn. And the problem is she's not playing, the Calgary Queen, which would be one thing. She's playing Diana Hart Smith. So that's when you get Stu on the phone. Why are you making my daughter look like a hooer?
Sorry, Stu, don't break.
Stop making her look like a hooer. I'll stretch you. Make you smell your own ass.
He would.
So that's the funny thing about wrestling. And especially when a wrestler gets a made-up name. So they're playing a character. Let's say Kevin Nash plays a character named Diesel. But then he goes to another promotion and he's not allowed to call himself Diesel. So what does he call himself? Well, Kevin Nash. Don't have to come up with a new gimmick. So if the line isn't blurred, it usually will be eventually when someone has to jump from one promotion to another. So I always thought that was really it's tricky. You got to basically live the gimmick in wrestling. I find most of the successful wrestlers, kayfabe is dead. We all know that, long dead. But the ones who were most successful and the ones who continue to be successful today are the ones who try to keep the kayfabe. Like, I guess Macho is a great example of that, because people always would say to people who work with him, did he really sound like that? 24/7, yeah, always, never off.
Cream of the crop.
Yeah, cream of the crop, cup of coffee. And that might seem like obsessive compulsive disorder, which his own brother has said. I think he had undiagnosed OCD. But he made a lot of money with that OCD. You know what I say? Be mostly OCD. You don't have to be completely OCD, but be mostly OCD.
Just enough.
Which is like, when you think about it, wait a second, mostly OCD? That's not, well, don't think about it. But, like, especially in wrestling, I think the guys who really live the gimmick, they crank that volume up to 10, were always the most successful ones.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to live on that other side. I mean, I could tell you, I won't, but I could tell you stories from backstage with, members of the Elite and SCU and people like that, and the variations and who's who and what's what. I know from my own perspective that it's an interesting juggling act, because using my real name in the wrestling world means that my journalistic integrity as a journalist is also on display. So one of the rules for me is I can't turn heel.
Yeah, you don't have the freedom of saying it's a work, baby. That's right. It's all a work.
That's right. But at the same time, I do lend the legitimacy of a real journalist is covering this event. So it's a give and take. I enjoy myself and get to have a lot of fun and show another side of my personality. But unlike many performers in the ring, there's a limit to how far I can go with that. I can't suddenly waffle somebody with a chair and say, haha, I was the mastermind all along. It was me, Austin. I can't do anything like that.
There are certain personalities in wrestling, commentators usually, who just have that feel. I remember when Jim Ross turned heel. Do you remember that one, when he brought in the fake razor?
Unfortunately.
And it felt so wrong. And that's another one that Jim just talked about on his podcast, Mr. Ross. And it felt so wrong, because he had that integrity, that even though he was really rambunctious and excited, he had the integrity of, you trust JR. JR won't lie to you. Everyone will lie to you. Like in wrestling, a lot of them are old school carnies, and, they'll lie to you. Jim Ross won't. And when they tried to make Jim into a big liar, it just didn't work, and they quickly ditched it, because it would be like Mauro Ranallo coming out, exactly like that. And, saying he hates a certain nationality or, gender, being if Mauro came out being a misogynist, like it doesn't feel right. And it's not because he's not doing it well. It's because that's just not your reputation.
To me, it's also unimportant to the business. I often say that a commentator, an announcer, a backstage interviewer is a microphone stand. I say to the guys that I work with, I'm here to get you over. If you want to throw me around, throw me around. If you want to be nice to me and shake my hand, shake my hand. Whatever you need me to do to assist your character and your development, I will do. Because nobody pays to see me. Nobody cares what happens to the announcer unless the announcer needs to get put through a table to further your storyline. I'm just here to help. So the moment you say, oh, look at this commentator, he's now a Iraqi sympathizer during the war, or look at this commentator over here, he's now a British Peaky Blinder guy, it's unnecessary. Nobody cares about the announcers. We're not here for that purpose.
Well, that's very humble of you, but I know there's been quite a few shows where you don't know what you got until it's gone. And, there's certain old shows where when I put them in and there's no Gorilla and Jesse doing commentary, or I put it in an old NWA and where's Tony, where's Jim Ross, and that's nothing against some of the other announcers. It's just, Chris Cruz was good. He was no Gordon Soley or Jim Ross. So, or watching Memphis wrestling without Lance Russell. It's like, you don't tune in, I'm here to watch Lance Russell, but when they're gone, you notice it. And it's, the commentators can be the spirit of the show.
But that's the way it should be. That's as much as we should contribute. I'm thinking of like the World Series Wrestling tour we did just recently. And Austin Aries and I had a mini feud during this last tour.
Of course.
And Aries just made sure that
I think
went out
Aries
of
and
his
me
way.
have a feud, and I've never met the guy. Like, it just, that's just, he's feuding with the whole world.
So Aries made sure that every time he and I were in the ring together, he would do something, whether it was just from a disdainful look through to a shove or whatever. And it built and built throughout the entire tour. The payoff at the end was when Aries lost the World Series Wrestling Championship. I was there to laugh at him.
Okay.
And so I was the audience surrogate in the same way that
Did you do like a belly laugh?
Yeah, basically. I was able to laugh at him as well because haha finally got one over.
Awesome.
And then we did a tour just recently with Abyss, which is Abyss's last independent dates before he joined WWE as backstage crew. And we, again, built a story about that where Abyss came in as a heel and eventually turned back to being his babyface self over the course of the tour, and then we farewelled him and gave him a big farewell. Part of that was his interactions with me over the tour, so that the audience knew, oh, he's pushing Sean around, therefore he's a bad guy.
Right.
And at the end, when he gave me a big hug in his retirement speech, everyone's like, oh, he's back to being a good guy again. So we add flavor, and in fact, we serve as an audience surrogate to give you almost like a lodestone. This is the direction we're headed. The shorthand is, oh, they're doing this to this announcer, therefore they are this person.
Yeah. That really is a lot like Mean Gene, because back in the old days, Mean Gene he was kind of like the narrator of the show. He would tell us, this guy, he's good. This guy, before the guy even says anything. Like, you might have never even seen Roddy Piper. But Gene, just from his expression, let's bring this guy in. Oh, give me a break. The guy hasn't even said anything. Give me a break with this. Roddy Piper! What is the meaning of this? And I'm thinking, like, he hasn't even done anything. Mean Gene, And then Piper shows you why he's so hated. Yeah. But it would be
Gene. Gives you that jump in as a character. If you've never seen the show before, you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing. So like I say, that direction, that lodestone, that moral compass, how do they react to this announcer tells you in shorthand what sort of person this is. But that's still not about getting Mean Gene over. That's about getting the talent over.
Exactly. And Mean Gene was great at it. I think Gorilla good too at, not usually trying to get himself over. Jesse would always be accused of trying to get himself over more than the other
wrestlers. He was allowed to. Heel's got to.
Although I don't think that was completely the case with him. He would put certain people over if they were good people, if they were nice to him. Like, I remember there was they call them enhancement talents now. In a previous time, they were called jobbers and
journeyman.
Yeah, journeyman wrestlers. I think was Omar Atlas, I believe, or someone like that. And any time he wrestled, and he was coming out there to get destroyed by Paul Orndorff or whoever, but Jesse would put him over from start to finish. This guy's a great talent. This guy has so much heart. And to compare him to the superstars, you wouldn't think anything of Omar, and you'd think, well, why is Jesse slagging everyone on the show? But this guy is the apple of Jesse's eye. And Jesse revealed in one match, he was my first match. I had my first match against him. And so he had a great experience with this guy. This guy let Jesse do what he wanted to do, and Jesse never forgot it. So that's what I always bring up when people say, yeah, Jesse was all about getting himself over. Maybe with people who were all about getting themselves over, and he felt the need to cut them down a little bit, cut them down in size. But just the fact that he would always do that tells me that, his heart's in the right place, and maybe he was just equalizing, and some people don't like it, an equalizer.
Especially in that era in the E as well, or the WWF as it was, the dog-eat-dog world, the Hogan era, the backstage era that they existed in, you had to defend your patch. You had to look after your own persona and your own self. Nobody was going to do it for you.
Absolutely.
As much as the rising tide was lifting all ships, it wasn't going to come bail you out if you started sinking.
Now, did you have any of the announcer LJN figures?
No. And
didn't they seem like the most useless? Like, what do I do with this figure?
Oh, I tell you, I would have killed for a Mean Gene as a kid. I've got one now, but I would have absolutely killed for a Mean Gene as a kid. But toy distribution in Australia in my era was so hit and miss and so strange. The best example I can give of that is, like I said, I was born in 79. So when the original A Real American Hero stuff started coming out, I was extremely young. But I had and can remember opening from mint on card Breaker and Rock and Roll and Snake Eyes.
Everyone's first Joe is Breaker.
Breaker.
Isn't that crazy? There's so many people
when you
I've
said
heard
that
over the
recently,
years.
I just spun out.
So many people over the years have told me my first Joe is Breaker. And I'm like, but my first Joe is Breaker too. That's weird.
But in terms of timing, being old enough to remember it and have the toy safely, there's no way I should have been able to access those toys mint on card. They were well and truly out of rotation by that point.
Yeah.
I've got a copy of Splinter of the Mind's Eye, the Star Wars novel that was written as the unintended sequel.
Yeah.
I was not old enough to have that book, and there's no reason my parents would ever purchase it. My first Spider-Man action figure was the Mego Pocket Hero, which was well and truly out of distribution by the time that I owned it. So I think, and like I say, I don't know this for a fact, but I think at that point in the 80s, Australia was so far behind in terms of stuff arriving from the United States, fads and cultural stuff arriving, that I was having access to stuff much later, but then missing out on some distribution. We've talked before about how I barely ever saw G.I. Joe vehicles, but the figures were reasonably plentiful. We never got Fortress Maximus down here, which, okay, makes some sense. He was huge. Certainly never got the USS Flag. But then we didn't get Swoop from the Dinobots either.
That's weird. But you got the other four.
But we got the other four.
Weird.
And I remember
Especially since
thinking that
he's the
Swoop was an
smallest.
invented character.
Yeah,
I remember thinking he was just for the TV show. He didn't have a toy.
Yeah, well, I was just going through my collection the other day, and I only had Grimlock growing up, and so I'm not that familiar with the other Dinobots, but just messing around with them a little bit, changing them from Dino to robot mode, and I once again was reminded, man, Swoop is tiny. He's like the mini-bot of the Dinobots. Like compared to the other big, bulky, boom, boom, heavy dinos, he is just this really like frail, tiny thing that's very un-Dinobot-like.
So stuff like that would happen with the LJNs. You'd get the entire first wave, then you'd never see them again. We got the entire first wave of Kenner Superpowers, and that was it.
Weird.
So distribution was really spotty and strange, and you would those big driving holidays we were talking about. So there was no Toys R Us in Australia. We didn't get a Toys R Us until I was in high school, and I actually worked there. My earliest memories of Toys R Us is the horrible Christmas of Tickle Me Elmo.
Oh.
That's when we got Toys R Us, in the Tickle Me Elmo era. So the main toy chain in Australia wasn't even a chain. It was a bunch of independent businesses who joined together to form a buying group called Toy World. It still exists to this day, but every store's independent. So they put on the shelves exactly what they wanted to put on the shelves. So you'd go to the Toy World in my hometown, and there would be Transformers, maybe a little bit of G.I. Joe, and everything from Mask, perhaps. Then you'd go to the Toy World the next town over, and there'd be no Mask, but they'd have the complete range of Bravestar.
Wow.
So when you'd go on these driving holidays as a kid, it was an opportunity to beg your parents to stop in every single Toy World in every single town, because you would find something there that you couldn't find anywhere else.
That's awesome. That's like it's like traveling through time. Instead of like city to city.
And it lasted
amazing.
so long that even by the 1990s, you get to a situation where I think I was almost out of high school. So we're talking mid to late 1990s. And I went through a Toy World in a little town that was so little that the Toy World part was actually the back wall of the hardware store.
Oh, really?
So you make your way through all the nuts and bolts, and there's the toys at the back. And they had the Green Goblin figure from the Spider-Man animated series line, which is one of the hardest figures to find in that line. There it is, the back of a hardware store, covered in wood dust next to the bandsaws.
Wow.
Reduced to 99 cents because they couldn't get rid of it. And we're like, I will have that, thank you very much.
That's what's great about the hobby. You've got those holy grails and hidden gems that are at the back of a hardware store for 99 cents. And
that was our experience.
You can't do that in many collectible hobbies. Like, that's not going to happen for Beatles fans. You're not finding a vinyl, like a whatever the most expensive Beatles piece of memorabilia is. You're not going to find it in such an obscure place for such a cheap price, because people are going to go, oh, well, Beatles, that must be worth something, and they'll check it.
So in Australia, buying toys as a kid was all about the hunt.
Yeah.
The way that we hunt now was the way that we hunted then. Okay, I'm going to stop in Gawler. What can I find? hey, they've actually got version 2 Storm Shadow here. Oh my God, with the red sword, I must have that. Right.
And the claw.
How am I going to get Thunder Punch He-Man? Well, I'm going to be ending up begging my parents to drive me to 3 different stores to try to see who's got Thunder Punch He-Man. I remember when Nightbeat came out, one of the later headmasters in G1, one of my favorite characters. Loved the character from the comic appearances. And I said to my folks, I've got to try to find this. My mum, by this point, because we're talking 89 now, my mum's like, hold on, gets the phone, rings Milton Bradley, who were the distributors for Hasbro in Australia, and says, can you just tell me where you've shipped Nightbeat to, please, and we'll go straight there.
Wow.
And that's what we did.
Cutting out the middleman or getting...
She'd had it by that point. She's like, no, not doing this anymore. I'm done. Finished.
Now that you mention it, I'm not remembering, like in the dying days of Transformers, because Nightbeat, Siren, Hosehead, the Headmaster Juniors, and some of the Pretenders too, I don't remember seeing them at Toys R Us, but I do remember seeing it. Like when I think of Nightbeat, I always remember Dutch Boy, which was a grocery store chain in my part of Canada, a grocery store chain with a little tiny toy aisle, which usually, like in grocery stores, you find like the $1 or $2 knockoff, really cheap stuff. You don't find the official Hasbro stuff. But this chain, this Dutch Boy chain, had Nightbeat, and I'll always remember seeing it and going, I'm not into Transformers anymore, and I've always regretted it. Like, you should have bought it. You should have, because I checked the prices for Nightbeat now, and I'm like, oh, damn. It was in my hands for peanuts, for nothing. It would have cost what a couple bottles of ketchup would have cost.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't remember ever seeing it at Toys R Us or any of the bigger chains, but there it was in a grocery store. So weird distribution, just for that one little thing, but it applied to your entire country.
Yeah, that's right. And all the way through. I remember that one of my favorite stories is that I found on the back of a comic book the Star Wars micro collection line, which you've only learned about recently, I understand.
Yeah, Joseph on Patreon told me about it. I love the thumbnail for that chat because I'm like, what is that thing? And he's showing me the X-Wing. So I didn't know I didn't know it existed.
Yeah, I fell in love with the line from the pictures. And so we'll get into why I had so many toys in a minute, because that's a story in itself, but my grandmother decided...
And I want to know if you got Thunder Punch He-Man, so we'll get to that in a minute.
We'll get to that too, yeah. So my grandmother decided she was going to find these for me. And turned out that they weren't being distributed in Australia at all. So my grandmother, being an absolute force of nature when she wanted to be... Now, keep in mind, we're talking 1983 here. She writes to the Sears department store in New York, asking whether they would be prepared to ship her the line if she figured out some way of paying for it. To their credit, Sears in New York said, yes, we'll do that. So my grandmother drafted an international money order, sent it to Sears in New York. They sent her the complete first wave of the Star Wars micro collection, and then that was parceled out over Christmases and birthdays and various gifts for the next 2 or 3 years.
Wow. Direct from the manufacturer.
And that's how you had to do it in those days. Like when Doctor Who became big, you couldn't get the Doctor Who action figures. So we had to contact Daypol in the UK and try to get money orders across to them and get stuff sent back, because things just never arrived here and you wouldn't see it any other way.
And I'm not surprised because that was Kenner with the micro collection, right?
Yeah.
That sounds like a thing that someone at Kenner would do. Because Kenner, even though they were the corporation, I think they were the corporation that still behaved like an individual with a really big heart. I think someone actually read the letter, read it, and went, I should do this. It's the right thing to do. Even if it didn't make any business sense or anything like that.
The other toy company that was fantastic in particular with Australia was Mattel.
Oh.
So Kenner was prepared to ship stuff. Hasbro had a distributor here through Milton Bradley, the board game company, and you could at least contact them. But Mattel were almost the Stan Lee of toys in Australia. They had a very personable relationship. They had a newsletter called Commander M. They created this character who was a spacefaring traveler who went between Earth and Eternia and kept you up to date on all the latest things in Hot Wheels and in Masters of the Universe.
Cool.
And so if you joined the Commander M Club, you got a decoder ring, you got a badge, you got a little patch to stitch onto your inevitably denim jacket, acid wash in those days.
I still have a denim jacket. It's part of the Canadian tuxedo.
And you got a quarterly newsletter. And then that quarterly newsletter would have text stories and little cartoons and puzzles and things like that, all completely original, all created for the Australian market. Mm-hmm. That's how I found out about Brave Star for the first time, because they spent a couple of issues of this newsletter building up Brave Star, with this whole idea of in the He-Man stories, they'd be getting garbled messages from New Texas saying, we need help.
Cool.
And He-Man never had time to go because Skeletor or Hordak would attack or whatever happened.
Did they send Rio Blast?
Well, that was what I wanted them to do. I love Rio Blast.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted them to do. And in the end, it's like, okay, we're fine. They've sent us one Ranger. And you've got He-Man and Man-at-Arms looking at each other in the story going, one Ranger, is that going to be enough? And by this point, I'm like, yeah, is that going to be enough?
That's
and then Brave Star comes out. It's like, oh, wow, this is amazing.
That was the whole tagline of the toy line. One was enough.
That's right. And they built it so well in Australia that it's really sad that it was as marginally successful in Australia as it was everywhere else. It just still didn't take off, even with all that preamble, which is really sad.
Yeah, in North America, they blame it on the show coming out, what was it, a year before or a year after the toy line?
There was a gap there somewhere. I can't remember which it was.
There wasn't a synchronicity. They needed synergy. Synergy, if you look at any successful toy line from the 80s, it's all about synergy. It's about the cartoon and the toy line being in perfect sync, and then a comic book, if you throw that into the mix too, just all being in sync with each other. And Brave Star, unfortunately, they just didn't repeat what worked before. And,
here's the thing, though. There was no synergy in Australia.
Yeah,
None.
that's what's really weird. Everything was discombobulated and disjointed.
We got the
so
original
you had to create
Transformers.
your own synergy, basically.
We did. So we got the original Transformers miniseries on TV, the Sunbow animated episodes, and then we didn't get them till 1985. Okay. The toys had already been out for a while by that point. Yeah, so we had the colouring books and the, a fair amount, sticker books, things like that to build the brand and the animation and things like that in terms of the toy commercials. Then the cartoon comes out and they played the entire first season. And then that was it. We didn't get season 2 in Australia until the late 1980s. We didn't get season 3 until the mid-1990s.
Wow. That sucks.
So as far as we knew, what we had was we had the first 13 episodes, and then we had, of all things, the UK Transformers comic book that came out in the magazine-size format and came out every 2 weeks. So my head goes, all right, so that's the end of the cartoon. Now the comic picks up from there.
Right.
So we had that comic, and the UK comic, if you're not familiar with it, actually had the Transformers, the movie cast, involved heavily in time travel and things like that.
Yeah.
So when the movie came out, the movie was huge in Australia because we knew who all those characters were.
Oh, good.
And there's a whole subset of Australian Transformers fans and even casual fans who remember Hot Rod and Ultra Magnus and Galvatron better than they remember Optimus and Bumblebee and Megatron.
Wow. That's wild. That's like alternate universe type of
alternate
stuff.
Universe, yeah. G.I. Joe cartoon never aired in Australia as far as I can find out.
Or Action Force either?
No, nor Action Force. We had, as far as I can tell, you could get the mass device on beta cassette at your local video store, and that was it.
Oh, that's too bad.
I didn't see Pyramids of Darkness until, I think, the 1990s.
Were there any other of the more obscure toy lines? I'm trying to think, like Inhumanoids, Silverhawks.
Never came out. We never saw Inhumanoids product. No. Nothing.
No Thundercats?
No, Thundercats did. Thundercats
they were pretty
did.
Big.
They were pretty big. In fact, they and He-Man were probably two of the biggest here in Australia. Them, He-Man, and Transformers. Transformers was huge. He-Man was so big here that it actually had its own chip brand, like snacks.
Okay.
So we didn't get cereals and things like that. I used to look in comic books at the fact that you had, He-Man cereal. I'm like, how do I get this amazing magical thing?
Because there used to be G.I. Joe cereal, which apparently was disgusting. Some people have told me it was horrible.
I imagine automatically.
It should taste like rations.
Yeah, ham and lima beans. Like anything G.I. Joe related's got to taste like ham and lima beans,
Yeah.
according to Larry Hama.
Just add water to reconstitute.
Oh, yuck. Meals ready to eat. They give you enough hot sauce to cover up the cardboard.
Oy. Oy.
But so we had He-Man battle snacks, and on the front of these He-Man battle snacks, you had a picture of what I now know to be Dragon Blast Skeletor and Thunder Punch He-Man. There's He-Man in red armor, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I must have this as a toy. I must. And I only knew it as Chip Packet He-Man.
Well, that doesn't sound. It doesn't have the same ring to it as Thunder Punch He-Man.
It really doesn't. And so I spent months scouring the shelves for Chip Packet He-Man, and my mother and my grandmother are like, what are you even talking about? The one on the front of the Chip Packet. They've just miscolored it, Sean. No, they haven't. It's going to be a new design. No, it's just a miscoloring. Skeletor's wrong too. It's going to be that. When it finally came out, I was so happy.
So you did.
It's
get
still
one.
my favorite. I did get one. It was
one
my
of the-
favorite for many, many years. I sold it eventually, and I now have a replacement. Still missing the sword, unfortunately, but I've got everything else of him, and he's my favorite to this day.
That was one of my most fun toys growing up too. He-Man, the original, was great. Everybody loves the original He-Man, but Thunder Punch was the one that I actually ran around and psh, psh, with the caps. One of the best cap firing toys ever. Like running around with a gun and shooting caps is one thing, and it's kind of cool, but it gets old very quickly. For me, it did anyway. But I tell you, Thunder Punch He-Man, I went through so many of those caps. I need more caps, Mom. Again? Like, we're buying a 10-pack this time. Psh, 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 psh.
I was very fortunate with caps because my mum came from a large family of boys, and they had grown up playing Lone Ranger, Annie Oakley, Gunsmoke, OK Corral, things like that. And so there were thousands of unused caps sitting in a box at my grandparents' place, and they were the ring caps. It's like, the mother lode. So my Thunder Punch He-Man never ran out of ammunition because it was always just a run around to Nan and Pop's place to get some more.
And I love the smoke that would come out of his backpack too. When you it made him mystical, right? Like the power of Grayskull with the thunder and the smoke too. And on one of the Patreon, the smell, yes, the sulfur. It's like he just tore open one of those portals that the sorceress creates for him. But in one of the Patreon roundtables, you talked about how sometimes you don't need an entire collection. You don't need to collect them all. You just need to collect that one special one. And like I talked about, I never even really thought about it, but like Wheeled Warriors, that's why I've only ever had 2, and I've never felt the need to add more because I've got the 2 that I want. So Thunder Punch He-Man for you is the He-Man figure that you need for your collection to feel complete.
Yeah, and I think part of that is a function of how sparse things were and how difficult things were to obtain here. As a kid, you'd look at the catalogs that we all loved looking at, and you wouldn't look at it with the mentality of, I'm going to get them all, because you knew even if you had all the money, you weren't going to find them all. So who do I have to have?
Who can I find?
Who can I find? Who's going to make me happy? What's going to fill the storyline or the adventure or the fantasy that I want to create today?
What were some of the other toy lines that you were able to track down back then?
Oh, let's see. Dukes of Hazzard from Mego was easy to find, of all things. Buck Rogers in the 25th Century was ridiculously easy to find. That was everywhere. We didn't have the Battlestar Galactica toys recalled like you guys did, so they were easy to find. Nobody in this country choked and died on a missile.
What about Star Wars? The original canon of Star Wars?
Star Wars was easy to find. The 3 3/4 were
all
everywhere.
3 movies?
All 3 movies. My memories start with the tail end of the Empire Strikes Back line. But I remember the first time Star Wars was ever transmitted on Australian television. And they advertised the toys during the transmission of the film. That's the first time I'd ever seen toy advertising on TV.
Synergy. Yeah. What is this?
Star Wars had it. Star Wars had it, and everybody was into Star Wars. Later on, Micro Machines was massive, absolutely massive. Strangely, Air Raiders did okay down here too.
Really?
Yeah.
Air Raiders.
Of all things. I think it's probably because you could play with it outside.
Yeah.
Stretch those strings everywhere and do that sort of thing.
What about some of the lesser known or less successful Hasbro lines, Cops and Visionaries?
Cops was huge as a cartoon when we got the Saturday morning cartoon thing finally working. After the Transformers experiment, you ended up getting one of the networks down here would do a morning of cartoons, like in America, 6 till midday sort of thing. And Cops was a big part of that rotation. That's when Brave Star finally turned up on TV, and everyone's like, oh, why did they never make toys for this?
Yeah.
They did, you just weren't there. So never saw a Cops toy until I started watching your videos. And Visionaries, not a thing. The only reason I knew what Visionaries were was because they were the backup strip in the UK Transformers comic.
I think Visionaries was another toy, now that I think about it, that was similar to those Headmaster Juniors. I don't remember seeing them much at Toys R Us, but I did see them at like a Bargain Harold's, which was a low-budget clothing store. Just like a really small insert in a mall, and just off in a corner, there were a couple of G.I. Joes, a couple of those knockoff He-Man, the Mexican bootleg He-Man, not even official He-Man, and a few Visionaries. And I was like, what are these things? They're slightly bigger than G.I. Joe? Why would you make something slightly bigger than a G.I. Joe? Why don't you either make it bigger like Cops or the same size as a G.I. Joe? But why would you do it half an inch bigger? It doesn't make any sense to me. Even looking at them right now on my shelf in front of me, I'm like, why did you do this? I love them, but why?
We never saw the Rambo stuff, as far as I know.
I was going to ask you about Force of Freedom too, yeah.
Yeah, when I saw and I have a theory about that and G.I. Joe. When I saw your collection of Rambo stuff, I went, oh, that's what they look like. I remember we had the Sergeant Rock figures that I think Remco did. There's a lot of Remco stuff out.
Yeah, the little guys.
Yeah, the Remco Sergeant Rock, and also the Remco AWA, NWA wrestlers.
Yeah. I've actually got
the He-Man.
I got the Nature Boy up there from Remco behind me. One of my original toys from my childhood. Remco Ric
And then that bendy line, that Lost World of barbarians and red-headed monsters with the two-headed dragon and things like that.
That's another toy line I remember seeing at Bargain Harold's. So like, what is this? This isn't...
That was everywhere.
Looking for like the Hasbro logo. Nope, this isn't an official toy. It had to be Hasbro, Kenner, or Mattel for it to be an official toy. Everything else was just some little factory somewhere overseas, and it's not a real toy.
But G.I. Joe and Rambo didn't do... Rambo wasn't here as far as I knew, but G.I. Joe didn't do very well, and I think that's because the Australian relationship with military and militarism is different to the American experience.
Yeah.
It's a quieter pride. It's not a jingoistic go out there and march kind of pride. It's you march on Anzac Day, you march on Remembrance Day, and the rest of the time you're just very grateful they do their job. It's not I don't want to say warmongering, but it's not a military-focused culture.
Yeah, it's very similar to Canada, too. It's exactly like Canada, but the thing with Canada is it's so close to the States, and Canada has had, and I don't know, maybe still has, kind of a little brother relationship with the States. Even when there are times where the little brother looks at the big brother and goes, at things that it disagrees with, it's still the little brother that's kind of like, ooh, what are you playing with? What is that? That was totally what was happening in the 80s with G.I. Joe, because even though they would switch the flags of the vehicles from American to Canadian,
cool.
I was still going, yo, Joe, waving the American flag as a Canadian kid, looking at my Canadian G.I. Joe vehicles, wishing they were American flags on there. And I think a big reason why I proudly wave an American flag along with a Canadian and every other nation's flag as well is because of that. Like most Canadians are supposed to only wave their Canadian flag. Australians are supposed to only wave their Australian flag. And I think it's just cool growing up that close to another country and seeing the love that people had for their nation and going, not only do I want to emulate that love for my own nation, I want to have that love for their nation, because their nation's awesome. I just love that. And plus also, they have been through so much. Their military had been through so much, and there had been such a negative response to some of the veterans of Vietnam. I mean, First Blood covers it, right? People
absolutely
being spat on, and they went through horrific things, and they came back and went through more horrific things when they came home. So it was kind of like a making good kind of, instead of tearing these people down, they got built up, and now they're superheroes. Now they're Marvel.
Yeah.
I always saw G.I. Joe, like the connection with Marvel was just a stroke of genius, because G.I. Joes are Marvel comic book characters with Marvel comic book personalities, yet they're still real life. It's almost like the Punisher if he wasn't grumpy. He doesn't really have he doesn't have any superpowers except his will, his spirit, which when you think about it, okay, well, now he's on the same level as Superman, because that's how strong his will is. And I look at the Joes and I go, that's Flint, that's Duke.
Yeah.
I mean, I put Flint and Duke and Footloose and Dusty and Sergeant Slaughter right up there with Captain America. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Captain America would salute each and every one of them and go, you guys are awesome.
Yeah. And I think here the sad thing is that some of the fallout from Vietnam was it was very much seen as America's war, and you involved us in your war. And we were dragged along by the coattails of our military alliances and our need to be safe in the Pacific and things like that. And how dare you do that to us? Mm. And so Americanized product like G.I. Joe was looked down upon, and stuff like Rambo, the film, certainly wasn't looked down upon, but I can't imagine that anybody in that sort of toy world buying group would look at a Rambo toy and go, that's something I should have on my shelves. Yeah. It's very much a, let's not do that. The time I remember G.I. Joe finally making a proper insertion into Australian culture was the 87, 88 line, so General Hawk, Law and Order, that era. And they were rebranded as movie, and they were rebranded. The Joe logo was changed to International Heroes.
Yeah, I remember that.
And that, I think, was the first time I can ever remember anybody in the schoolyard talking about G.I. Joe, apart from me. When I had Rock and Roll and Breaker, Snake Eyes, and I think the Cobra Officer, I didn't know what they were for the longest time. I used to use Snake Eyes as a symbiote suit Spider-Man, because I had no idea what he was.
That's a good idea, actually.
It worked well for me.
Well, I always thought he was a villain. I mean, before the cartoon came out and I saw him on the pegs, I thought, oh, he's a Cobra. It was Cobra Trooper, Cobra Officer. Oh, Cobra's the bad guys. And then this guy who was just no color, head to toe, and he kind of looked sinister, and his name was Snake Eyes. I mean, Cobra, Snake...
It's got to go together.
When you found out he was part of the Joe team, I'm like, okay, even if he's part of the Joe team, this guy's kind of a jerk, isn't he? Like, he's the guy everyone hates. He's like Snake Eyes. He's probably going to be quitting soon, right? Nope, turned out to be pretty much the ultimate Joe. So, and then...
Wonderful character.
Go figure, the flip side of his coin is the guy in white, Storm Shadow.
Which I loved. Even as a kid, I really picked up on that inversion and just went, yeah, that's great. That's great.
Going back to the wrestling figures, do you remember which LJN guys you had?
I only had Hulk Hogan. It was the one and only one that I had. So my G.I. Joe Sergeant Slaughter got a lot of work out wrestling against this enormous Hulk Hogan.
Could he body slam him?
Yep.
Yeah, like
as did my Masters of the Universe. They sort of took over and became my wrestling figures. I think I had a He-Man that was done up with some Play-Doh and stuff to turn it into Paul Orndorff.
Oh, that's brilliant. How long did the belt last before it tore?
Actually, my belt lasted all the way through, still in one piece to this day.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive. Those
very fortunate.
I don't think mine lasted very long, because I would take it on, take it off, put it on over and over again. Have you heard of the Young Bucks, the new LJN style Young Bucks figures? Have you seen these?
Yeah, I really do want those. What do
you think of, like, today? Wrestling figures have tons of articulation, great detail. But what do you prefer, like the old smash and bash LJN rubber style, no articulation, or the more modern detailed stuff?
Let me answer it this way. If I was a Transformer, I would be an Autobot, and my tech spec bio would be, the less articulated it is, the better I like it.
Ah.
I'm not one for articulation in anything. I'm happy for bricks. I'm happy for, two arms that move and no legs, like a Power Master Optimus Prime or something like that. So give me a wrestling figure that is character. I'm quite happy to hit Tyler Daniels over the head with a giant rubber figure anytime. I can't hurt him and keep him away from me with a floppy Mattel figure.
Have you ever seen someone use a King Kong Bundy LJN as a foreign object?
Yes.
Because that thing shouldn't.
It's a shot put.
It shouldn't have been legal to sell that thing. It's a weapon. How many rings?
Turnbuckles.
Yeah,
how many ring posts?
How many LJN rings were cracked thanks to King Kong Bundy getting slammed headfirst into it?
I worry about how many people tripped and fell onto those ring posts. You know, you hear the horror stories of people piercing themselves and stuff because they were just so sharp. Like, I look at it now and.
Do you know if was that just like a one-off short run the Young Bucks did? For people who don't know, the Young Bucks are a tag team. They were on the Indies. Now they're starting a new organization with Cody and his wife Brandy
Rhodes.
And they're starting a new organization called All Elite Wrestling, which is going to be debuting on TNT, which is huge news here in North America because that's what Nitro, WCW Nitro, was on all those years ago. And so the Young Bucks came out with, it looks exactly like the old LJN tag team sets of like the Bulldogs and the Killer Bees and the Hard Foundation. And it's them doing their poses, but it's like the old rubber. And is it like the same kind of rubber?
As far as I know,
material?
Yeah, as far as I know, I haven't gotten to see them yet up in person, but from what I've been told by some of the other boys that work with them, they are as close to the LJNs as you can possibly get. So I'm really keen to get a hold of them. As far as I know, they're selling them through Pro Wrestling Tees. I'm not sure how limited or unlimited the run is.
I know
they had a lot at Chicago to sell.
I'd love to see more of those because it seems as like Super 7 is doing the vintage Masters of the Universe style, and I think they've really hit the nail on the head because those look like they should have come out in the 80s. Aside from like the hip little change to not use the rubber in the legs, but other than that, they look like exactly like the figures that came out. Not a little smaller, not a little bigger, but just like them. And I know Jax tried to do the rubber style figures. I think they were chase figures.
Kept them small too.
Yeah, they were smaller. Yeah, they need to be the right size. So I wish, that they're bringing back the Star Wars figures. We've got the retro collection. Turtles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have been doing retro reissues. Now Super 7 is doing the Masters of the Universe straight up reissues. Wrestling, it was a big hit in the 80s, and I think there are a lot of collectors who will drop the money on. I don't know if they can make these deals with the legends to make like an LJN style Paul Orndorff figure again, or make a deal with Piper's family to make a Piper figure. It probably can't be identical to the original one. I don't know if they're allowed, the rights issues and stuff, reissue them. Because they're doing those retro action little Hasbro style guys.
They are.
That look great. I mean, they're the right size. They look like the old Hasbro ones. I've been looking for a Ric Flair for ages and can't find them anywhere because that's just my luck. I mean, the one I want of all of the retro action figures, the only one I want, never hit the stores here.
I'll keep an eye out.
Because I want to get one of those. I don't like the original Hasbro Ric Flair. He's got that weird expression on his face, a non-Flair expression. So I love the new one with the baby blue tights, and I've got like a little tiny big gold belt, which I guess is an oxymoron, but it's a tiny big gold belt, which would look great on the Nature Boy. I hope they continue with those, but I also want those LJN figures too, because I don't have much space, but I could make space for like a new LJN Piper or Macho. They could do a whole line just on Macho. All of the robe era, and then the electric cowboy, as he's called, era, and then the NWO, and then the leather cowboy. That could go on for years. Ultimate Warrior could have his own line. Like there's certain wrestlers. Shawn Michaels could have 36 figures all to himself.
I'd love a Sting. A proper LJN scale Sting. That would be
figures. Yeah, instead of just redoing the old guys that we got, guys that never were, like WCW guys.
Yeah,
so Sting would be great. The Road Warriors.
What biggest missed opportunity. That would have been. They were my tag team. That would have been so incredible. I would have loved them as LJNs.
Can you imagine? Because seeing the Young Bucks special edition tag team set, I'm like, oh, that's so cool. But can you imagine same style packaging, the Road Warriors or some of the other classic teams like Horsemen? Seeing Wyndham Barry Windham and Arn, or Tully and Arn in that style of box, with that style of, some people might call it lack of detail and articulation. I call it charm.
I call it character.
Yeah, character. The less you have to work with, the more the actual fun character comes out of it. And I think an LJN Tully Blanchard is going to beat, hands down, any super articulated Jax or Mattel Tully Blanchard figure any day of the week. As long as the poses are right, because that was one of the major problems with LJN figures. The pose had to be right so that you could do something with the figures. Hogan's was great, the first one, because you could suplex, you could clothesline, you could even leg drop, sort of, with Hogan. Paul Orndorff, kind of useless. Can't pile drive with Paul Orndorff. So he'd have to be like kind of, arms in front of him in the pile driver position. Arn Anderson, he'd have to be kind of like this spine buster ready. With kind of like a hooked arm for DDT as well.
Yep.
You got to put this, because I think back then they weren't thinking about this stuff when they were designing the toys. They were just like...
I think we were also more forgiving in our imaginations. Like, I look back at my Superpowers Kenner Batman, and he wasn't super articulated, but I remember the martial arts kicks and punches that he used to pull off, because we would, your mind would fill in the gap.
Yeah. Who are some other wrestlers you can think, not just WWF, but any organization that you would love to see in LJN style?
Obviously, very biased to see the World Series wrestling roster done. The Machine, Brian Cage, Flip Gordon, Joey Ryan, Marty Skrull, Brody King, all those people, to see them as LJNs would be fantastic, and not purely because then I could actually get the ring out and book my own matches. That would
While you're actually at the show. Sean, pay attention.
Marty, I've got an idea for a move. Watch this.
They call it the Australian Destroyer. It's a triple Canadian destroyer.
But we do it upside down.
Yeah, the other way. It just rotates the other way.
Coriolis effect goes a different way down here, boys. Yeah, that would be cool. Australia's wrestling scene is full of some really incredible talents, one of whom, Adam Brooks, is going to be wrestling for MLW coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Major League, cool.
So if anybody out there is watching Major League Wrestling, make sure you check out Brooksy. He's a former Riot City Wrestling champ, former MCW Inter-Commonwealth champ. And this guy, I'm not going to say this kid, even though he's younger than me, he's the second coming of Jeff Hardy.
Oh, really? I don't know if that's a good thing.
In-ring wise.
No, I'm talking like in 20 years, will he be able to walk? Will he be able to have a match without getting injured?
He's grown up watching Jeff Hardy, so he's like, I won't do that.
Good.
I'll do
Learn
this.
from the
Smarter,
mistakes.
not harder. And this kid is one of the best undiscovered talents in Australian wrestling, so check him out. Also, Jonah Rock, who's Adelaide born and bred, is now on NXT. He's phenomenal, worth checking out. And Australia's, queen of wrestling, Rhea Ripley, the former NXT UK champ, trained right here in Adelaide, one of my dearest friends. I'd love to see an LJN figure of Rhea.
That's awesome. And I'd love to see a Sean Fewster figure, just in the exact same pose as Mean Gene Okerlund. What was it, like this? Like, I don't know, holding the mic. And,
I think it's pain silence. It's like, here we go again.
And even though I said earlier, like as a kid, the wrestling announcer figures were useless, now in my older days, you can still have a lot of fun with the announcers and be the spirit of the match. So I do find myself having Mean Gene go up to other wrestlers and mic, and like the promo doesn't happen unless Mean Gene's mic is in your face.
That's right.
So
That's right.
When I was doing that recent Macho versus Steamboat LJN match, the recreation,
which was amazing, by the way.
Thank you.
Just absolutely amazing.
But it wouldn't have been right. It wouldn't have felt right without Gorilla and Jesse at ringside. And I was about to do that without them and just have their commentary going. And I had the Jesse figure, and I thought, well, I'll just put Vince there with them and pretend, or just leave it a space. Who cares? And I thought, no, I can't, because they're just as much the star of the match as Macho and Steamboat. I don't think that match would have been as well remembered if it was Lord Alfred Hayes. Nothing against Lord Al. I love Lord Al. But if the commentary was Lord Al and Sean Mooney, they're great. Don't get me wrong, they're great. But they're not as great. They're not as timeless and legendary and epic as Gorilla and Jesse. So that's why I had to customize the King Kong Bundy, and just even having them at ringside bantering. I'm like, this is awesome. You know, there's action everywhere. It's in the ring, it's out of the ring. Even at ringside, they're about to go at each other's throats. Like that's the tension, right? That's the great thing about commentary, that the match is influencing the commentary. It's not just the commentary influencing the match.
Oh, absolutely. You're reacting because there's a limit to what we will know about a match, and some commentators prefer to go in knowing absolutely nothing and just do it completely straight, as you know, reacting to things as you see them. And I've commentated now for both live events and also for televised events. When World Series Wrestling did its first pay-per-view, which is on Fight Network, we had to commentate just looking at the monitors rather than the action that was right in front of us. That's a completely different experience because you're making sure you're shaping your commentary to the bounds of the screen. Mm-hmm. And you're letting that, like you say, influence what you say, and then you're picking up on that in your commentary dynamic to rag on each other or boost each other or whatever, to send it then back to the performances in the ring.
Do you have like a, because I know Gorilla used to have one with Bobby, will you stop? Like a catchphrase.
Will you be serious?
Yeah. Do you have a catchphrase or a common admonishment that you use with the difference?
If I do, I don't think I've picked up on what it is yet. I know I do tend to do a few Gorilla-isms at times. I will drop some of those things in there as a bit of an homage. He'd probably be the best one to tell you that, because it would be whatever annoys the heck out of him the most.
I have a request, if you can fit it in naturally. There's a line of Gorillas I think is really unappreciated. We know all of the common ones, but I think Strictly Bananas isn't one.
Strictly Bananas.
Yeah, I don't think that's one that gets mentioned very often, but it's one of my favorite Gorilla-isms. They have gone strictly bananas.
All right, well, you watch Riot City on YouTube, and I'll try to drop that in there.
That is just a fantastic line, because it makes it so serious, even though it's bananas.
Strictly bananas.
And then all the other, and if it was what is it? The French Canadian Pat Patterson, they have gone strictly banana, because
that's what Mick Foley used to say. They gone banana.
Well, they're always making fun of Pat Patterson because he can't pronounce, or he seldom pronounces the letter S on plurals. So these are the best match I've ever seen in my life. Oh, the wrestler back there. All of the wrestler are great. Oh, the crowd, they're banana.
They go banana.
They go banana. Yeah, whenever you hear that expression, they're making fun of Pat Patterson. Yeah, Gorilla had a bunch of great ones. They are literally hanging from the rafters. I don't think Gorilla understood it's that Inigo Montoya line. I do not think that word means what you think it means.
But does anybody understand what literally means anymore? It's so overused.
Yeah, literally is literally not literally.
Oh, as a journalist and as a writer, sometimes I weep for my language.
What is it? Your and your. That's the one that whenever I see it, I go. But I'm kind of I'm a relic in terms of technology, and I just got my first smartphone this past year. I was using like the old, it wasn't even a flip phone. I hadn't worked up to that yet. Just like an old thing that couldn't surf, couldn't take pictures, could barely text. You press the key and you wait 3 seconds and whatever you pressed comes up. Like, it was archaic. So I got a smartphone, and I just discovered a voice to text. So I hit the microphone, and it's like it's writing everything that I say. I'm like, this is brilliant, because I can't text very fast. And then it all made sense. Like, oh, that's why grammar has become what it's become on the internet, because people are just a lot of the time text to talk, and it's like it's too much effort to go and find it and capitalize or comma, quotation.
Yeah, and that hurts me, because I'm the guy that still sends grammatically perfectly pronunciation text messages, because I just can't help myself. It's what I do all the time. So it's like, no, it's got to.
I make the effort usually as well, because I believe in going the extra mile, and I also believe in the value of training and habit. So instead of, oh, what a bother to fix this and correct it, I think of it's a necessary habit. And I talked about it in my recent Real Talk video. It's the lack of habit that's the problem too. So not doing something over and over again when it could be helping you, that's the problem. So, you know, it might seem like, you know, people might think, what's the big deal? It's just the internet. It might be just the internet, but it's also you, and you're not just you with just your crappy grammar and spelling. You could be exceptional. So don't just be you with crappy grammar. Be exceptional.
It's interesting that you say that, because that, funnily enough, ties into toys and things for me. One of the reasons that I had so many toys as a kid, and why I've got stories of my grandmother going to extreme lengths and stuff, is I was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder at 5. I was one of the first diagnosed cases apparently in the world, probably in Australia, but apparently in the world. Back then, there was no Ritalin. Nobody knew what you were supposed to do for these kids. So my mother and grandmother went through this painstaking process of writing down everything that I ate and then what I was like a couple of days later to try to figure out if there was a dietary connection. And it turned out there was. Sugars, preservatives, colorings, flavorings, everything that made a kid in the 1980s gone.
Oh, no.
So at the age of 5, Sean gets told, you can't have chocolate ever again. You can't have candy ever again. You can't have Coca-Cola. You can't have 7-Up. You can't have Sprite. All of this stuff is gone. There's no more McDonald's. There's no more Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's all gone because you can't eat it without going absolutely banana.
Oh, no.
That's
Strictly banana?
Strictly banana. That's a massive thing to tell a kid. And, you know, you go grocery shopping or something like that, and, you know, oh, Billy, if you're good, I'll buy you a chocolate on the way out, or I'll buy you a bag of Skittles or whatever. Yeah. So my parents and my grandparents were a case of, you know, if you're good for the next month of shopping trips, you can have a Transformer, or you can have an LJN or whatever. And so toys were my reward for actually keeping my sanity. Because if I did slip up and I did eat any of this stuff, the consequences were horrendous. Even to this day, I still have the problem. I went into rages. I would get in trouble at school. I would fight people. I would attack people. It's awful. And you come out of it, you don't remember what you've done. Mm-hmm. And I remember vividly.
Like Hulking out.
Like Hulk, I love the Hulk as a character. I love werewolves as characters because I can identify with that feeling.
Or Wolverine, his berserker rage, right?
Yeah, all of that. And so
that's what Canadians are like when they haven't had their maple syrup in a while.
I know. So that to me sort of cemented this link between personal discipline and personal morality and toys and toy characters. And I remember vividly deciding at one point that after I decided I wasn't going to listen to my diet, I was going to eat what I wanted, and everything went wrong at school, and I got in trouble, and I got at home, and I got in trouble. And I remember thinking vividly, I need to be more like Optimus. I need to be less like Megatron. And so those characters and those toys came to be totems and symbols and reminders of that need to be excellent to myself, to aspire to a higher level. And so they came to mean a lot more to me than just a plaything. They were a reward that I needed to look after, which is probably why my Hulk Hogan belt lasted to this day, but also an inspiration to aspire to. And it informed a lot of my morality and a lot of my sense of self-discipline. So even to this day, things like, you say, making sure the grammar's correct on a text message, it probably dates back to, I need to do this right because I know what happens when it goes wrong. One of the true joys of my journalistic career was that I got to interview Peter Cullen.
Oh, cool. Optimus Prime.
Which was amazing. Did it over the phone, and we had a really good conversation ahead of him coming here for a convention appearance. And he said to me at the end of the conversation, when I get to Adelaide, let's meet up face-to-face and do a photo shoot to go with the interview. And my friend Pontip Sontavong, who you can see on Old Trenchy on YouTube, built a 8-foot-tall Optimus Prime costume.
Okay.
He actually walks around in. And so I said to Pontip, can you come and be in the photograph? And while he's building himself and Peter's watching in absolute awe, Peter Cullen, by the way, is exactly who you want him to be. He is exactly who you want him to be. I told him the story of the influence that Optimus Prime had on my life and the diet and everything like that, and he cried.
Yeah.
And he gave me a really big hug and said to me, "I don't know whether this will mean anything to you, but I'm very proud of you." And that's when I cried, because sticking to your guns, being excellent to yourself, aspiring to something higher, and using these examples as a way of propelling you through dark times. I mean, not being able to eat food isn't really the worst problem in the world. There are so many people out there that have such bigger challenges to face than I'll ever face in my life, and they do it with dignity and poise and perseverance that I could never hope to muster. But that was my little challenge, and toys and fictional characters got me through that little challenge, and so I still hew to those lessons to this day, even if it's just a text message, I guess.
That's awesome. And that sounds so similar to my experience as well. When I was going through the period of my life when most people would start drinking, and then even getting into drugs, and they would always justify it by saying it's nothing major, right? It's just weed. What's the big deal? And I said no, because I want to take the exceptional path, and I just toys instead of drinking, instead of that type of stuff. I put the money into toys, and I didn't have a huge collection growing up, but if I had a little bit of spare cash, it didn't make any sense to me to buy a 2-4, like a case of beer, because I looked at that like, how much is that? It's this many bucks, and I'd go, that's a Sky Striker.
Yeah.
And I don't have a Sky Striker, so why am I buying a case of beer when I could have a Sky Striker forever instead of a case of beer which is gone, however long it takes, it's gone. And yeah, it's you want to have your fun and stuff, but I just thought, I took a gamble. I said, I think in the long run this will make me happier, and I can say decades later I was right. Did the right call, because I've got a pair of Sky Strikers and I love them. I absolutely love them, and I never think, man, that could have been a case of beer back in 1980, or 1994 or 5 or whenever, I got any of this stuff. I never look at the flag and go, that could have been a couple cases of beer, or that could have been a couple bags of pot. Never happens, right? Always just go.
Same with me. Same with me. I
made the right choice.
I didn't find out what straight edge was until CM Punk came on the scene.
Yeah, he popularized the term.
I've finally got a name for what I've been my whole life. And friends have said to me that. They're like, oh, so that's what you are. And I'm like, well, now I've met Brody King, and he's covered in tattoos, and he lives the lifestyle in a particular way. So I understand I'm not actually straight edge, but that's an easy go-to.
Well,
Australia's such a massive drinking culture. You'd go out, and journalism in particular is a huge drinking culture. You'd go out when I was a young journalist, and they'd say, oh, you can have a drink? No, I don't drink. What do you mean you don't drink? Rah, 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 rah. Nowadays, you say, oh, I'm straight edge. Oh, cool. It's the end of the conversation. So I like it very much as a conversation ender.
And I like the term straight edge too. It's better than straight laced, or what's the other term? A teetotaler or something? Teetotaler. I mean, none of those really sound. You want something that sounds cool, right? You don't want something
cool things.
You don't want it to sound like you are missing out on fun and that you're a stick in the mud. This guy's a party pooper. Like that's not fun. But CM Punk, bringing him up, he had a program with JBL one time. And of course, JBL was going to try to make him drink. And so they did this promo where they had a bunch of booze. And I think Punk, one of his closing lines in the promo was sometime, and this is before he was exploded as CM Punk. I think it was early into his maybe first world title reign or something like that. And he said, sometimes it's the things that you don't do that define who you are. Yeah. And I just went, that's me, and that it just really resonates with me. There's so much about, people want to share who they are, and they show other people who they are by saying, this is the music I like, and these are the clothes that I like, and this is the car that I drive, and this is the jewelry that I have. This is me. And here's this guy who comes along and goes, I don't do this. This is who I am. And I thought, man, that's cool. That's really cool. The things that he abstains from, the things he chooses not to do, his self-discipline is who he is. And how do you show self-discipline? You can't show it. You have to live it. You have to do it.
Yeah.
And
Every day.
And what I found is that, for young people out there who are feeling pressure from their friends at school, or people who aren't their friends but wish they were their friends, and the drinking thing just doesn't work for them. If you've tried, to drink beer and it tastes like pee, and you're like, why do people drink this? Well, you have to be cool. What I say is, like, if you abstain, if you make your decision and you don't hum and haw about it, if you don't act like you're embarrassed and like, if you kind of stick your chest out, kind of put your chin up, and that expression that I like to use about G.I. Joes, if you do a lopsided grin and a twinkle in the eye and you go, I don't need it, you'll find that you get made fun of, you get poked and made fun of after a while. But if you just keep going, but I don't need it, and you keep doing it, what usually happens is they'll start to change around you. The stronger will always dominates. Always.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, sometimes, the big, loud, obnoxious jerks have the strong will to do unhealthy things. And they influence other people. In that Jim Ross podcast, he was talking about how, unfortunately, Davey Boy was influenced by people who had self-destructive tendencies. Davey was a great wrestler who kind of picked up bad habits from other wrestlers who abused drugs. But if you are, if you don't want to drink, do drugs, if you want to take care of yourself, be healthy, because you want to live a long, productive life, have quality of life for a long period of time, and you just keep doing that, that's a very strong will. And the people who are kind of like, I think I could go for a beer or something like that, something else unhealthy, and they're around your really strong will, then they'll start to get inspired and go, which I've heard for years and years and years, I quit drinking because, just seeing the effect that it has on you, not drinking, and they're so happy, all this extra money they have that they can spend on, things that last a lot longer than a beer or a joint or anything like that. So I never want to come off as, on a high horse, being pious and telling people you can't do this and you can't do that. That's not my game at all. You can do whatever you want to do. It's just maybe take a second and think about why you're doing it. And if you're doing it because it makes other people happy and not you happy, you're probably doing it for the wrong reason.
The thing that I say to people is, I've been on tour buses and in hotel rooms with the coolest people in all of professional wrestling right now, the people that everybody want to hang out with, with the elite, with the AEW guys, things like that. And I've sat in those hotel rooms, straight edge as I am, and had as much fun with them and as much respect from them as they have vice versa. We've all had fun, and there's no pressure, there's no BS. It's just, do you want some of this? No thanks, I'm good. Okay, cool. And we all continue, we all have a good night. So to kids out there that are feeling pressured, I would say the truly cool people, not the people that are trying to be cool, but the truly cool people are the ones that will say, you do your thing, I do my thing, let's have fun together. Respect is the ultimate cool.
And I agree with that 100%. I have been in so many situations, hanging out, going to a party or something like that. Hey, you want a drink? And that line I said before, where I would say, I don't need it. And I can get as fun and silly and goofy and uninhibited as anybody. And sometimes I've heard, man, how many have you had?
Yeah.
The big donut hole, 0. Well, how's that possible? Courage, confidence, strong will, awareness. I don't need to put something in me to change how I behave. I behave the way I want to behave. And that's the message I love to put out. And I love seeing this whole straight edge movement grow and grow, because people are realizing I don't need to throw one back in order to have fun. It's not like a key to the kingdom of fun. You really don't need to. And, if someone has if they're really shy, if they're inhibited and they need to drink in order to loosen up, lighten up, I just challenge. I like to throw out challenges and say, isn't there something else you could do to break down that wall of inhibition? Okay, the drinking is easy. It's a shortcut. what else could you do? I mean, as radical as it might sound, what if you ran a mile? What if you did a bunch of push-ups? What if you just beat your chest Ultimate Warrior style and you snarled and you just awoke that inner beast, that inner warrior, and you put yourself in a different mindset, and all of a sudden you're in a different zone, and people go, how many have you had? And you go, none. Well, how did you do it? I thought alcohol or drugs is the only way to access that part of your personality. No, there's different ways. It's a little harder, but it's also, I've always found a little more fun to find those different pathways, not just take the shortcut.
And remember what happened the night before the next day.
Exactly. No regrets. No, what happened? No hangovers. I've never had a hangover in my entire life.
Yeah, look, as someone that has been able to be uninhibited by something as simple as a piece of pineapple from the age of 5, I'm quite happy to remain in control, thank you very much, but I can still have as much fun as anybody else. If I can hang with the wrestlers, then I think I'm doing okay in the fun stakes.
That's awesome. Well, we're well past an hour here, man. I could go on for a lot longer, but I think we'll wrap this particular one up, but I'm looking forward to chatting again. I say that to everyone, but I absolutely mean it. I mean, I love doing these Toy Guys Talking because it's awesome that we don't just sit here and talk about, Thunder Punch He-Man for 2 hours. It's cool how...
Although we could.
We could, and we should have maybe next time. But I love how these conversations weave in and out, and it never feels like there's any pressure of like, we got to get back to toys. We just naturally do. I mean, it starts with toys. It comes back to toys, in and out. It's kind of like toys have been with a lot of toy collectors. They were a big part of your life, and then they kind of went out for a while, completely out for some people, and then they come back in and they go back out. And I think that's just cool. That's how toys work.
No, I've loved it. And for me, it was an opportunity to get to hang out with you properly. I mean, I love the chats that we have over typing on the internet, but just some time to hang out with you and get to know you even better and talk one-on-one like this and share some experiences. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, so I would highly recommend to everyone out there, talk to people. And we're in an amazing age where, some people are down on technology. People are always staring at their phones and texting. But take the opportunity to talk to people. You can't really look a person eye to eye on Skype or Google Hangouts or any of those other things, but you can almost. I mean, in some ways it's actually better because it's, some people might have trouble with eye contact. So this is just like 2 inches off.
Yeah.
It's probably, the best of both worlds. But it's a lot better to be able to actually hear a person, talk to them, interact in real time. So online interaction is awesome. It's fun. It's convenient. But, there's nothing quite like talking to a person. So thanks to everyone who watches these Toy Guys Talking. Glad everyone is enjoying them as much as I am enjoying doing them.
And I am.
But also make the effort. If you have an internet friend, if you have a Facebook group friend or a friend that you're interacting somewhere, make the effort and say, "Hey, dude, do you want to chat? Sometime." And even if it's weird, it's only weird at first. I mean, there isn't a thing on the planet that's weird the 100th time you do it. By then, it's just habit. So get from weird to habit. Just make the effort. But Sean, huge thanks, man. Really enjoyed talking with you one-on-one like this and hearing all about Australia, toys in Australia in the 80s and 90s. Fascinating to me. Really cool.
Michael, thank you very much for having me, and please keep doing what you do. It's been a gateway to me to see the other side of the world and the same experiences, so I'm really loving it.
Really appreciate that. And definitely try to work Strictly Bananas into a show. And if you do, give me a heads up on that because I'd love to see that. I will go Strictly Bananas if I hear you use that line. Let's plug your Twitter. You're on Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter at Sean Fewster, on Instagram, which is where all the fun toy stuff is, which is at Sean_Fewster, and on Facebook as well, which is facebook.com/Sean Fewster. Twitter will give you my wrestling and my journalism. Facebook will give you my wrestling and my journalism. with more of an emphasis on the journalism. And then Instagram's going to give you probably the stuff that everyone here wants to see, which is the toys, the toy collecting, the hunts that we go on regularly, which we call Real Life Peter and Ned, and also lots of wrestling lunacy.
That's awesome. Just in closing, are there any more of those toy stores in Australia, in your area?
Of Toy World?
Toy World, yeah.
Toy World continues to exist to this day, yeah. In fact, they actually took over, one chain of Toy World actually took over all the empty Toys R Us locations.
Oh, that's good. And is it the distribution similar to how it was back in the day?
Still works exactly the same way to this day.
Any inclination to do a road trip video, like a documentation of?
If you check out on my Instagram stories, you'll see some of the times we've been to Toy World, but there are plans. So Pontip and I like to film and document our various toy hunts. And first weekend in June 1 and 2, the Mega Toy Fair is on in Adelaide, which is an entire showground pavilion hall filled with vintage toy dealers. And it's the biggest weekend of the year as far as we're concerned. So we'll be filming that as well. But awesome. Yeah, I reckon a Toy World trip is well and truly on train now. You've put the idea in my head.
Oh, that would be cool, because one of the things, we still have Toys R Us here in Canada, and I feel as though I could say that 1,000,000 times in a month, and there will still be people who will go, "What? There's still Toys R Us in Canada?" Like there's somehow people who miss like all of the other dozens and dozens of Toys R Us in Canada posts, and this is still news to them. But one of the things is like if I travel to a different area, it's still mostly the same stuff that's in my town. So it's cool to see another Toys R Us, but it's kind of a cookie cutter thing, right? Same, which I love what they've done with Toys R Us now. Since the US closure, they've made a lot of improvements here in Canada. It's kind of like the shackles are off, and now they actually get to do a lot of fun stuff that they weren't allowed to before. Like little PlayStation, not Sony PlayStation, but little PlayStation areas for children to play with the toy. So the toy is opened and it's all set up and you can play with it. And if you like it, grab the box and buy it. Stuff like that.
They do that in Japan as well, which is awesome.
Yeah, and the jingle plays like every half hour. I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us. If you want to feel like you've traveled back in time, just walk through a Toys R Us in Canada for a half hour. And when you hear that song, I'm like, oh my God. Wow, that's synergy, right? It's not just the store, it's not just the toys, it's the music playing through the PA and all that. So yeah, I'm not much for traveling, but I'm intrigued by this ability to go through Australia, all these different toy stores, and it's kind of like time travel. Like, what do we have here, and what do we have here?
Just a little bit different, not as big as it was in the old days. The distribution chain is not as different, but some of them you're walking, you go, why is there a complete Gundam wall in this toy store? Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's more like an alternate dimension. Like, wow, this town really loves their Gundam. That other town prefers their He-Man and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's been a blast. Thanks so much for joining. And everyone out there, definitely check out Sean's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram for more toy and wrestling and journalistic goodness. I'm sure you'll go strictly bananas. Thanks a lot. Until next time, Nerdmas Day.
Thank you all.
What's the typical Aussie sign off? Good day, mate.
See you later. See you later.
Hey, let me see if I can get it. See you later.
See you later.
2 mega powers meeting here tonight